The first time I heard her play, it was an accident. I was supposed to be interviewing a property developer in a sterile high-rise 2 blocks over, talking about sustainable urban growth and zoning regulations. My recorder was in my bag, my questions neatly prepared. But I'd gotten turned around, taken a wrong turn down an alley that smelled of damp concrete and frying oil, and emerged into a courtyard I hadn't seen on any map. And that's when I heard it. A guitar, but not like anything you'd hear in a coffee shop or on the radio. This was raw, unvarnished. A melody that wove through the thrum of the city like a vine through a chain-link fence, both part of it and determined to break it apart. It was lonely and beautiful, and it pulled me, a physical tug behind my navel, towards a fire escape ladder hanging from a brick-faced building older than my grandparents. I'm Claire. I write articles. I fact-check. I live my life in structured paragraphs and verified sources. I do not follow mysterious music up rusty ladders. Yet, my fingers closed around the cold, flaking iron. My sensible loafers found their footing, and I climbed. The rooftop was a kingdom of forgotten things. Potted plants fought for space with cracked terracotta, wild and overgrown. A string of fairy lights, unlit in the afternoon sun, drooped between a vent pipe and a makeshift pergola. And on the ledge, facing the sprawling skyline, was she. Her back was to me, a leather jacket hugging her shoulders, head bowed over a worn acoustic guitar. Her hair was a dark, untamed cascade. Her fingers, adorned with a few simple silver rings, moved over the fretboard with an effortless grace that made my own hands feel clumsy and useless. I stood there, frozen by the intrusion, afraid that the scrape of my foot on the gravel would shatter the spell. But then the song shifted. It fractured, a note bending out of tune, and she let out a soft, frustrated sigh that carried on the breeze. She turned, and her eyes, the color of dark honey, found mine. I expected annoyance. A demand to know what I was doing there. Instead, a slow, curious smile played on her lips. Lost? She asked. Her voice was exactly what her music sounded like, smoke and honey. I heard you playing, I stammered, feeling my professional persona evaporate. You're incredible. She shrugged, a gesture that was both acceptance and dismissal. It's a conversation. Sometimes I listen, sometimes I talk. Her gaze was direct, appraising. I haven't seen you before. I don't live around here. No, she agreed, her eyes tracing the lines of my blouse, my tailored trousers. You don't. What brings you to my rooftop? And somehow, standing there 10 stories above the city, I told her. About the missed interview, about getting lost, about the music pulling me up. It was the most honest thing I'd said to anyone in weeks. She listened, her head tilted, and when I finished, she simply patted the space on the ledge beside her. Sit. The view's better when you're not standing guard. That was how it began. I went back the next day. And the day after that. Under the pretense of writing a piece on the city's hidden artists, a story my editor would likely never greenlight. I brought my notebook, but I rarely wrote in it. We just talked. Or didn't. Sometimes she'd play, and I'd watch her hands, the way they coaxed beauty from wood and wire, and I'd feel a quiet ache in my chest, a longing for something I couldn't name. She was a collection of fascinating contradictions. Tough but gentle, grounded yet seemingly able to drift away on a thought. She made her living restoring old furniture, her hands as skilled with wood and varnish as they were with chords and melodies. It's the same thing really, she told me once, sanding the leg of an old table with a rhythmic, practiced motion. You're just listening for the song hidden inside the grain. You strip away the old, damaged layers until you find it. I thought of my own life, layers of expectation and routine, and wondered what song, if any, was hidden beneath. The attraction was a live wire between us from that first day on the rooftop. A constant, humming energy that made the air feel thick. It was in the way our hands would accidentally brush when she handed me a cup of coffee, the way her gaze would linger on my mouth when I spoke. It was in the way I found myself thinking about the curve of her smile in the middle of writing about municipal tax codes. I was terrified of it. I, who planned my life in 6-month increments, was utterly disarmed by this woman who seemed to live entirely in the present tense. And then tonight on the rooftop, with the city lights shimmering like a spilled jewel box below us, she had been playing a new song. It was soft, yearning. She looked at me while she played, and the space between us collapsed. I didn't think. I leaned forward and kissed her. The music stopped. The string snapped. And now here I was in her apartment, the air crackling with what had almost happened before the world interrupted us. The spell was broken, but the tension remained, thick and heavy. My body was still humming, my skin tingling from her touch. The button on my jeans was still half undone, a tantalizing promise hovering between us. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her expression a mix of apology and unwavering desire. I should probably get that. She didn't finish the sentence. The phone buzzed again, a rude, persistent intrusion. She didn't move, her eyes still holding mine. The decision was mine to make. To let the moment die, or to keep it alive. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and cupped her jaw. Her skin was warm, and she leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. "Let it ring," I whispered. The smile that broke across her face was brilliant, relief and triumph and pure, unadulterated heat. "Thank God," she breathed, and her lips were on mine again, not with a slow exploration from before, but with a hungry, focused intensity that swept away every last coherent thought. The phone eventually fell silent. The outside world could wait. The world shrank to the space of her breath on my skin, the pressure of her hands, the solid reality of her body against mine. The interrupted moment didn't fade, it transformed, evolving from surprised discovery into deliberate, breathtaking intention. Her kiss was a question I had spent my whole life learning how to answer. When we finally broke apart, the air in the room felt new, as if we had used up all the old, inert oxygen and created our own atmosphere. My entire being was focused on the points where we connected, her palm flat against my lower back, my fingers tangled in the soft hair at the nape of her neck. The frantic rhythm in my chest had settled into a deep, resonant hum. "Where were we?" she murmured, her voice a low vibration against my lips. A shaky laugh escaped me. "I believe you were conducting an interview." The dark honey of her eyes glittered with amusement. "Ah, that's right. And you were a fascinating subject." Her thumb stroked the sensitive skin just above the waistband of my jeans, right over the half-undone button. I believe I was about to ask another question. This time, when her fingers moved to the button, there was no hesitation, no buzz of a phone to break the spell. The metal gave way with a soft sigh of denim. The sound was infinitesimal, but it echoed through me like a thunderclap. It was permission. It was a beginning. She didn't rush. Every movement was measured, a study in patience that made my head spin. She guided me back toward the well-loved velvet couch, its surface soft and welcoming. The colorful blankets were a riot of texture beneath us. She knelt on the floor before me, her hands resting on my knees, looking up at me with an expression of such focused reverence that it made my throat tighten. "Is this still okay?" she asked, her voice hushed. All I could do was nod, my voice lost somewhere between my heart and my head. I reached for her, my hands framing her face, pulling her up to meet me in another kiss. It was slower now, deeper, a silent conversation that flowed between us. I could taste the bourbon and the unique essential flavor of her, something wild and sweet I knew I would crave forever. Her hands moved under the hem of my sweater, her palms warm as they slid up my sides. Her touch was electric, leaving trails of fire in its wake. I mirrored her, my fingers finding the hem of her t-shirt, slipping beneath the soft cotton to trace the defined muscles of her stomach. She inhaled sharply against my mouth, a sound of pure pleasure that fueled my own courage. I broke the kiss, my breath coming in soft pants. "Your turn," I whispered, my voice unfamiliar, thick with want. I pulled the shirt over her head, and the world stopped. Her skin was a canvas of art and strength, a landscape I desperately wanted to explore. The botanical tattoos curled around her arm, a garden in permanent bloom. A delicate, intricate pattern of lines and dots swept across her collarbone. She was more beautiful than any of the art on her walls, more compelling than any story I'd ever chased. My fingertips traced the lines of ink, following the paths over her shoulders, down her arms. I learned the geography of her, the smooth plains and the subtle ridges of muscle. She watched me, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her gaze dark and unwavering. When my thumb brushed over the peak of her breast, she closed her eyes, a soft, surrendering sound leaving her lips. "Claire," she breathed, my name a prayer on her lips. That single word, the way she said it, shattered the last of my reservations. I was no longer Claire the journalist, the planner, the observer. I was just a woman, unraveling in the hands of another, and it was the most free I had ever felt. We sank into the cushions of the couch, a tangle of limbs and whispered confessions. The distant city sounds became the soundtrack to our discovery. There was no hurry, no destination other than here. We learned the maps of each other's bodies, the places that made the other gasp, the touches that elicited a sigh, the rhythms that made us lose all sense of time. Later, much later, we lay wrapped in one of her woven blankets, my head resting on her chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of her heart. The frantic pace from earlier was gone, replaced by a calm, powerful rhythm. Her fingers traced idle patterns on my bare shoulder. "So," she said into the quiet, her voice rumbling beneath my ear. "For the article." I smiled against her skin. "The article?" "Ma'am, you must have more questions for your profile." I propped myself up on an elbow to look at her. The golden light from the lamp caught the silver in her nose ring and lit the amusement in her eyes. She was so beautifully, unapologetically herself. I felt a surge of something so powerful it was almost frightening. "Just one," I said, leaning down to brush my lips against hers. "When can I see you again?" Her smile was everything. It was an answer, a promise, a new beginning, all at once. The morning arrived not with a jarring alarm, but with the gentle insistence of daylight filtering through the windows, painting gold stripes across the floorboards and over the woven blanket tangled around our legs. I woke slowly, my consciousness returning in layers. First, the unfamiliar weight of an arm draped possessively across my waist. Then, the scent of sandalwood and warm skin. Finally, the quiet, even sound of her breathing against the back of my neck. I didn't move. I simply lay there, memorizing the feeling. The solid warmth of her pressed against my back, the way her fingers curled loosely even in sleep. My mind, usually a whirlwind of to-do lists and unanswered emails, was preternaturally still. There was only this, the quiet room, the soft light, the profound rightness of being held by her. Last night hadn't felt like a departure from myself, but rather a return to a self I had forgotten existed. A self that could be spontaneous, that could follow desire without a 5-point plan, that could be so thoroughly, wonderfully unraveled. As if sensing my wakefulness, she stirred behind me. Her arm tightened slightly, pulling me closer. A soft, sleep-rough murmur vibrated against my skin. "You're still here." It was said with a note of wonder that mirrored my own. I turned in the circle of her arms to face her. In the soft morning light, she was even more stunning. The sharp, cool confidence she wore like her leather jacket was gone, replaced by a sleepy, unguarded softness. Her hair was a dark mess on the pillow, her eyes heavy-lidded. "I'm still here," I confirmed, my voice morning hoarse. A smile touched her lips, and she leaned forward to press a soft, closed-mouth kiss to my forehead. It was an unexpectedly tender gesture that sent a wave of pure affection crashing through me. "Good," she whispered against my skin. Then, with a groan, she stretched, the muscles in her arms and back flexing. "Coffee. The world requires coffee before it can become real." She slipped out from under the covers, and the cool air rushed in to take her place. I watched her pull on her discarded t-shirt and a pair of soft, worn sweatpants, her movements easy and familiar in her own space. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of something, not longing, but a sense of belonging so acute it was almost painful. This scene felt as natural as breathing. "You take yours black, right?" she called from the kitchen nook, the sound of beans grinding filling the small apartment. I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. "How did you know?" She peeked around the corner, a smirk playing on her lips. "You strike me as a purist. No sugar to sweeten the hard truths." I laughed, a real unforced sound. "And you?" "Let me guess. A concoction of exotic spices and enough sugar to induce a coma. A splash of oat milk. See? I'm not a complete animal." The rich, earthy scent of brewing coffee began to weave through the air, mingling with the sandalwood. She came back and handed me a steaming mug, our fingers brushing. The simple contact still sent a spark, a quiet reminder of the electricity that hummed between us, even in this calm morning aftermath. I took a sip. It was perfect. Strong and robust. "You were right. Purist." She settled onto the edge of the couch, facing me, her own mug cradled in her hands. Her gaze was thoughtful as she looked at me, taking in my sleep-tousled hair, the blanket pulled up to my chin. "So," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "What does Claire the journalist do on a Tuesday morning when she hasn't slept in her own bed?" The real world, with all its obligations and structures, began to knock softly at the door of my consciousness. My editor, my deadlines, my empty apartment waiting for me. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay in this warm, messy, beautiful bubble forever. "I should probably go home," I said, the words tasting like a betrayal. "Change. Face the music." She nodded, understanding. There was no pressure in her expression, only a quiet acceptance that soothed my sudden anxiety. "The music can be pretty loud," she agreed. "But you have a standing invitation to come back and drown it out whenever you want." The offer was simple, but it felt monumental. "I'd like that," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all morning. Getting dressed was a slow, silent ritual. I pulled on my clothes from the night before, each piece carrying the memory of her touch. The soft wool of my sweater, the denim of my jeans, now buttoned without the thrilling anticipation of them being undone. She watched me from the couch, sipping her coffee, her gaze a physical warmth on my skin. When I was ready, she walked me to the door. The space felt charged again, but differently than the night before. This was not the frenetic energy of new desire, but the deeper, more resonant hum of a connection that had taken root. She leaned against the doorframe. "I have a gallery pickup for a restored desk this afternoon. Otherwise, my evening is open." "I'll call you," I said, reaching for her hand. I laced my fingers with hers, solid and real. She brought our joined hands to her lips and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. "See that you do, journalist." The smile she gave me then was a sunrise, full of promise and light. I stepped out into the hallway, and the door clicked shut behind me. The descent down the stairwell was different from the climb up. I wasn't escaping the world, I was carrying a piece of her back into it with me. The city outside was the same, but I was not. Something had cracked open inside me, and for the first time in a very long time, I was excited to see what would grow. The chill of the morning air in the hallway was a shock to my system after the warmth of her apartment. I stood for a moment, my hands still tingling from the pressure of her lips against my knuckles, the scent of her, sandalwood and sleep, clinging to my sweater. The world outside her door seemed both exactly the same and irrevocably altered. My walk home was a surreal journey. The city, usually a symphony of specific tasks and destinations, had become an impressionist painting. I noticed the way the light caught the steam rising from a manhole cover, the melody of a forgotten song drifting from a passing car, the palette of grays and browns in the brickwork of the buildings. My own neighborhood, with its neatly trimmed hedges and silent, respectful sidewalks, felt like a film set. I had been playing a part here, the part of Claire the professional, the reliable one. Now, the facade felt thin. My apartment was exactly as I had left it, pristine, quiet, and utterly empty. The silence here was different from the comfortable quiet of her space. This silence was heavy, accusatory. It highlighted the absence of life, of art, of the beautiful, chaotic evidence of a soul in residence. I dropped my bag by the door and leaned against it, closing my eyes. I could still feel the ghost of her arm around my waist, the weight of her gaze. My phone, charged and businesslike on its dock, buzzed. The screen lit up with a calendar notification. Editorial meeting 10 a.m. The digital type was a stark reminder of the life I was due to resume. For a wild, heart-pounding second, I considered calling in sick. I could spend the day in the cocoon of my bed, replaying every second, every touch, every whispered word. But that wasn't me. Or it wasn't the me I had built. So I showered, the hot water failing to wash away the sensation of her. I dressed in another crisp professional outfit, the fabric feeling foreign against my sensitized skin. I was going through the motions, a well-programmed machine, but the operator inside was someone entirely new. The editorial meeting was a study in surrealism. My colleagues discussed lead times and advertising revenue, their words bouncing off the new soft armor I seemed to be wearing. My editor, Brenda, a woman with a perpetual air of mild crisis, fixed her gaze on me. "Claire, the piece on the waterfront development. How's it coming? The council vote is next week." I looked down at my notebook, at the neat, orderly lines waiting for neat, orderly thoughts. The only words my mind supplied were midnight blue and electric violet. I cleared my throat. "It's progressing. I have an interview with the head architect this afternoon. I should have a draft by end of week." Brenda nodded, satisfied, and moved on. I felt a thrill of duplicity. I was working on a story, just not the one she thought. The most compelling story of my life was unfolding in a rooftop apartment filled with abstract art and the scent of sawdust, and they were all oblivious. The interview with the architect was a test of my professional fortitude. I asked the right questions, my recorder capturing his dry monologue about load-bearing walls and environmental impact studies. But my mind kept drifting, comparing the cold, calculated lines of his blueprints to the wild, emotional swirls on her canvas. He built structures to contain life, she created art to set it free. Later, back at my desk, my phone vibrated with a new message. It wasn't a number I had saved, but I knew it instantly. Hope the music wasn't too loud. My evening just got very, very open. The desk pickup was a no-show. Attached was a picture. It was a close-up of her workbench, a guitar string coiled into a perfect shiny spiral next of a pair of wire cutters. The caption read, "Restringing. In your honor." A laugh bubbled up in my chest, so sudden and genuine that a colleague across the aisle glanced over in surprise. My fingers flew over the screen, a directness in me I didn't recognize but thoroughly enjoyed. "What time?" The response was immediate. "Is now too soon?" I looked at the half-written, painfully dull paragraph on my screen about concrete foundation pilings. I looked at the clock. It was 4:37 p.m. "I have to finish something," I typed, a flicker of my old self asserting itself. "Give me an hour." "I'll be here," she replied. The doors unlocked. The final hour of my workday was the most productive I'd had in weeks. A fierce, giddy energy propelled me. I finished the paragraph, outlined the next, and sent a flurry of emails, my focus sharp and clear. I had a destination. A purpose that had nothing to do with bylaws and everything to do with the way her eyes darkened just before she kissed me. When I arrived at her building, my heart was performing the same frantic rhythm it had the night before. I took the stairs two at a time, the metallic echoes a drum roll for my arrival. Her door was, as promised, unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was washed in the golden light of late afternoon. She was on the floor, cross-legged, the guitar across her lap. She was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration as she twisted a tuning peg, her long fingers gently stretching the new silver string. She looked up as I entered, and the concentration on her face melted into a smile that was both soft and deeply knowing. "You came back," she said, as if I had any other choice. "I told you I would." She plucked the new string. It rang out, clear and bright and perfectly in tune. "So you did." She set the guitar aside and rose to her feet in that fluid, effortless way of hers. She didn't rush to me. She just stood there, looking at me, taking in the sight of me in my work clothes, back in her world. "Long day, journalist?" "You have no idea," I breathed out, finally letting my shoulders relax, the professional armor I'd worn all day cracking and falling away. She closed the distance between us then, but slowly, giving me time to retreat. I held my ground. She reached out and with infinite care, untucked the press-pass lanyard from around my neck, letting it fall gently onto a nearby table. It was a simple act, but it felt profoundly symbolic. She was removing the uniform, welcoming back the woman beneath. "Welcome home," she murmured, and her lips found mine. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of wood polish in her, with a taste of coffee and promise on her lips, I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core that I had never had one until now. The days that followed were a lesson in a new kind of grammar. My life, once structured by the rigid syntax of deadlines and appointments, began to incorporate a more fluid, poetic language. It was the language of her world. A text message that read simply, "The light on the bricks right now is the color of honey," sent during my afternoon slump, could re-enchant an entire day. A shared silence over coffee in her sun-drenched kitchen held more meaning than a dozen business meetings. I learned the rhythms of her life. The days she spent in her workshop, emerging with fine sawdust clinging to her jeans and a smudge of varnish on her cheek. The evenings she dedicated to music, her fingers finding new melodies on the freshly strung guitar. I was both audience and accomplice, curled on her velvet couch with my own work, stealing glances at the focused line of her brow. It was during one of these quiet evenings that the professional and the personal collided with the force of a tectonic shift. I was transcribing notes from my interview with the architect, the dry details of zoning variances feeling more alien than ever in her warm creative space. My digital recorder sat on the coffee table between us. Anna was sketching in a large leather-bound book, her pencil moving with a quiet scratch. She looked up, her gaze landing on the recorder. "Do you ever turn it off?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes curious. "The recorder? Of course. It's just a tool." "Is it?" She put her sketchbook down. "It feels like a third person in the room sometimes. The observer. Making sure you get the facts straight." Her perception was unnerving. I did use it as a shield, a way to maintain a professional distance even when I was swimming in the deep end of a story. It helps me be accurate, I defended, though it sounded weak even to my own ears. I get it, she said, not unkindly. She nodded toward the device. So, interview me. My heart stuttered. What? You're writing a piece on hidden artists, right? Or was that just a line to get onto my rooftop? The challenge in her eyes was playful, but it held an edge. She was testing me. It wasn't a line, I said, my voice soft. I meant it. Then ask me a question. On the record. She leaned back, spreading her arms along the back of the couch, fully exposed. Go on, journalist. Let's see what you're made of. This was the precipice. To point the lens of my work at her felt like a violation of the sacred space we were building. But to refuse felt like admitting that what we had was too fragile for the truth. Slowly, my fingers trembling slightly, I reached over and pressed the record button. The small red light glowed like a cyclops eye. I took a steadying breath, slipping into my professional persona like a familiar, ill-fitting coat. Can you tell me about your process? How you move between music and visual art? She held my gaze, a small smile playing on her lips, as if she could see right through the facade of the question. They're just different languages for the same feeling, she began, her voice taking on a thoughtful melodic quality that was perfect for the recorder. A song is a feeling stretched over time. A painting is that same feeling, captured in a single explosive moment. Sometimes the feeling needs to breathe and unfold. Other times, it needs to scream all at once. I was captivated, both by her and by the perfect quote she was giving me. The journalist in me was thrilled, the woman in love was terrified. And the restoration work? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Where does that fit in? That's listening, she said simply. The music and the painting, that's me talking, me expressing. The restoration, that's me listening to the story the wood wants to tell. It's about patience. About uncovering what's already there, not imposing something new. Her eyes locked with mine, and the professional distance I was clinging to evaporated. It's about seeing the beauty in the existing structure, and just helping it shine again. The air left my lungs. She wasn't just talking about furniture anymore. The red light on the recorder seemed to pulse, an accusation. I was capturing this profound, personal philosophy, reducing it to content for a potential article. I couldn't do it. My hand darted out and I pressed the stop button. The red light vanished. The silence that rushed in was heavy and significant. What's wrong? She asked softly. I can't, I whispered, staring at the now inert device. I can't put this on the record. This, what you're saying, it's not for an article. It's for me. The playful challenge in her eyes softened into something deep and warm and understanding. She uncoiled from her spot and moved across the couch, her presence enveloping me. She didn't touch the recorder. Instead, she took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. Why? She asked, echoing her question from our first night. The days that followed were a lesson in a new kind of grammar. My life, once structured by the rigid syntax of deadlines and appointments, began to incorporate a more fluid, poetic language. It was the language of her world. A text message that read simply, "The light on the bricks right now is the color of honey," sent during my afternoon slump, could re-enchant an entire day. A shared silence over coffee in her sun-drenched kitchen held more meaning than a dozen business meetings. I learned the rhythms of her life. The days she spent in her workshop, emerging with fine sawdust clinging to her jeans and a smudge of varnish on her cheek. The evenings she dedicated to music, her fingers finding new melodies on the freshly strung guitar. I was both audience and accomplice, curled on her velvet couch with my own work, stealing glances at the focused line of her brow. It was during one of these quiet evenings that the professional and the personal collided with the force of a tectonic shift. I was transcribing notes from my interview with the architect, the dry details of zoning variances feeling more alien than ever in her warm creative space. My digital recorder sat on the coffee table between us. Anna was sketching in a large leather-bound book, her pencil moving with a quiet scratch. She looked up, her gaze landing on the recorder. "Do you ever turn it off?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes curious. "The recorder? Of course. It's just a tool." "Is it?" She put her sketchbook down. "It feels like a third person in the room sometimes. The observer. Making sure you get the facts straight." Her perception was unnerving. I did use it as a shield, a way to maintain a professional distance even when I was swimming in the deep end of a story. "It helps me be accurate," I defended, though it sounded weak even to my own ears. "I get it," she said, not unkindly. She nodded toward the device. "So, interview me." My heart stuttered. "What? You're writing a piece on hidden artists, right? Or was that just a line to get onto my rooftop?" The challenge in her eyes was playful, but it held an edge. She was testing me. "It wasn't a line," I said, my voice soft. "I meant it." "Then ask me a question. On the record." She leaned back, spreading her arms along the back of the couch, fully exposed. "Go on, journalist. Let's see what you're made of." This was the precipice. To point the lens of my work at her felt like a violation of the sacred space we were building. But to refuse felt like admitting that what we had was too fragile for the truth. Slowly, my fingers trembling slightly, I reached over and pressed the record button. The small red light glowed like a cyclops' eye. I took a steadying breath, slipping into my professional persona like a familiar, ill-fitting coat. "Can you tell me about your process? How you move between music and visual art?" She held my gaze, a small smile playing on her lips, as if she could see right through the facade of the question. "They're just different languages for the same feeling," she began, her voice taking on a thoughtful melodic quality that was perfect for the recorder. "A song is a feeling stretched over time. A painting is that same feeling, captured in a single explosive moment. Sometimes the feeling needs to breathe and unfold. Other times, it needs to scream all at once." I was captivated, both by her and by the perfect quote she was giving me. The journalist in me was thrilled, the woman in love was terrified. "And the restoration work?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "Where does that fit in?" "That's listening," she said simply. "The music and the painting, that's me talking, me expressing. The restoration, that's me listening to the story the wood wants to tell. It's about patience. About uncovering what's already there, not imposing something new." Her eyes locked with mine, and the professional distance I was clinging to evaporated. It's about seeing the beauty in the existing structure, and just helping it shine again. The air left my lungs. She wasn't just talking about furniture anymore. The red light on the recorder seemed to pulse, an accusation. I was capturing this profound, personal philosophy, reducing it to content for a potential article. I couldn't do it. My hand darted out and I pressed the stop button. The red light vanished. The silence that rushed in was heavy and significant. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. "I can't," I whispered, staring at the now inert device. "I can't put this on the record. What you're saying, it's not for an article. It's for me." The playful challenge in her eyes softened into something deep and warm and understanding. She uncoiled from her spot and moved across the couch, her presence enveloping me. She didn't touch the recorder. Instead, she took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. "Why?" she asked, echoing her question from our first night. This time, I had the words. "Because this isn't a story I'm covering. It's the story I'm living." I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at her. "The observer has left the building." She brought my fingers to her lips, her kiss a soft seal on my confession. "Good," she murmured. I was getting jealous of her. She took the recorder, ejected the small memory card, and pressed it into my palm. "This is yours. Do with it what you want." "But what happens in this room?" She gestured around us, at the art, the guitar, the tangled blankets. "This stays between us." I closed my fist around the tiny piece of plastic, feeling the weight of a decision I didn't know I needed to make. It felt like throwing away a life raft, but the water I was in was warm and I had finally learned how to swim. "It stays between us," I agreed, and the last vestige of the wall between Claire the journalist and Claire the woman crumbled to dust. I didn't know what I would tell my editor. I didn't know how I would reconcile these two competing truths of my life. But in that moment, with her hand in mine and the unrecorded, unedited truth of us filling the quiet room, I knew, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that I had chosen the right story. The memory card became a talisman I carried in my wallet, a small, hard reminder of the line I had drawn. For a week, it was easy to forget the world beyond the walls of her apartment. We existed in a golden hour haze of shared meals, the soft strum of her guitar, and the profound quiet of simply being together. But the world has a way of sending a bill for the time you spend in paradise. I was at my desk, finally making headway on the waterfront development article, a capable, if uninspired, piece of journalism, when my phone buzzed. It was Brenda. "Claire, my office. Now." Her tone was the verbal equivalent of a slamming door. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I walked in to find her staring at her monitor, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Shut the door." I did, my mind racing. Had I missed a deadline? Misquoted someone? She turned the screen toward me. It was a social media page. A photographer I'd vaguely known in college had posted a series of moody, beautiful shots of the city's unseen creative hearts. And there, in the center of a collage, was a picture of Anna. She was leaning against her workbench, a half-restored guitar in her hands, laughing at something just outside the frame. The caption read, "Anna, luthier, painter, and keeper of the city's true soundtrack." My blood ran cold. "Care to explain?" Brenda asked, her voice dangerously calm. "I have to find out from a third-rate photographer that my star features writer is sitting on a gold mine? This is exactly the kind of hidden artist story I was talking about. This woman is compelling. And you're, what? Interviewing her? Socializing?" The lies lined up on my tongue, ready for deployment. "It's preliminary research. I was building rapport." But looking at Anna's face, so alive and unguarded in the photograph, I couldn't do it. We have a personal relationship," I said, the words feeling both freeing and terrifying. Brenda's eyebrows shot up. "Even better. Get the inside scoop. The personal angle. I want a profile. 5,000 words. Depth, color, intimacy. You have unique access. Use it." "That's not. I can't do that," I stammered. "It would be a violation of." "Of what, Claire?" "Your journalistic integrity." She leaned forward. "This is your job. This is the story. Your personal life is your business, but when it intersects with a headline-making feature, it becomes my business. Get me the story." I left her office feeling like I'd been hollowed out. The two worlds I had been trying to keep separate had just violently collided, and I was standing in the wreckage. That evening, the warmth of Anna's apartment felt like a lie I was living. She knew immediately that something was wrong. "Hey," she said, her hands resting on my shoulders, kneading the tension she found there. "You're a million miles away." I turned to face her, the words sticking in my throat. "My editor." She saw the photographer's pictures. The ones from last week. Her expression didn't change. "Okay. And she wants a story. A big one. A profile. About you." The sentence hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She was silent for a long moment, her hands dropping from my shoulders. She walked to the window, looking out at the city. "What did you tell her?" "I told her we had a personal relationship." She said that was even better. That it gave me unique access. I spat the words out like poison. She turned, her face unreadable. "And what are you going to do, Claire?" This was the real question. The one that had been haunting me all afternoon. It wasn't about an article anymore. It was about who I was going to be, the journalist who got the story, or the woman who protected the woman she loved. "I don't know," I whispered, and it was the most honest and most pathetic thing I could have said. The silence that stretched between us was the coldest it had ever been. The unspoken accusation was there. You brought the observer back in. You just gave her a new lens. The silence in the wake of my confession was a living thing, thick and cold. It crowded out the warmth, muffled the distant city sounds. Anna didn't yell. She didn't even look particularly angry. She just looked, measured, closed. She turned from the window and walked to her kitchen, picking up a cloth and wiping down a spotless counter with a focus that felt deliberately avoidant. "I see," she said, her voice flat. "Anna, I didn't know that photographer was going to post those. I had no idea my editor would see them." The excuses sounded feeble, even to me. I was the one who had brought my world into hers. I was the contaminant. It doesn't really matter how she saw them, does it? She didn't look at me. The point is, she did. And now she wants the story. And you're the one she's asking to write it. She finally stopped wiping and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. It was a defensive posture I'd never seen her use before. "So what's the angle? My secret romance with a rooftop musician? Or something more highbrow? An intimate portrait of an uncompromising artist?" "Stop it," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "That's not fair." "What's not fair, Claire?" Her eyes finally met mine, and the hurt in them was a physical blow. "You showing up here with your recorder and your questions, or you pretending you weren't. You've been writing your piece since the moment you climbed onto my rooftop. I was just too stupid to see it." "That is not true." The words burst out of me, fueled by a surge of desperate anger. "Everything I've told you, everything that's happened between us, has been real. What I feel for you is the most real thing in my life right now. How can you not see that?" "Because I've been a story before." The words erupted from her, sharp and pained. She pushed off the counter, her composure fracturing. "People see this," she gestured vaguely at her tattoos, her art, her entire being, and they see a character. A fascinating subject. They want to capture the color, the edge, the authenticity, without any of the messy humanity that comes with it. They take, and they distill, and they put it in a neat little box with a clever headline. And then they leave. The raw vulnerability in her voice shattered me. This wasn't about a single article. This was about a lifetime of being misunderstood, of being used as inspiration and then discarded. "I am not them," I said, my voice low and fierce. I took a step toward her, but she held up a hand, a clear boundary. "Aren't you? Your editor gives you an order, and you come here and tell me you don't know what you're going to do. What is there to know? The question hung in the air, immense and simple. What was there to know? The choice was binary. My career, the path I had meticulously built for over a decade, or this beautiful, terrifying, unpredictable woman who had reorganized my entire universe in a matter of weeks. I looked around the apartment. At the painting of midnight blue and electric violet that had captivated me. At the guitar leaning against the armchair. At the sketch of the sculptor's hands, another old muse, another story that probably ended with a broken heart. I saw the life she had built, a life of authentic, messy creation. And I saw my own life, a series of neatly arranged facts, a byline on a page that would be lining a birdcage tomorrow. I walked to my bag, which I had dropped by the door. My heart was hammering, not with panic now, but with a strange crystalline clarity. I pulled out my wallet and found the memory card. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger. You asked me what I was going to do, I said, my voice steady for the first time all night. I walked to the small trash bin by her desk, lifted the lid, and dropped the memory card inside. It landed with a soft final tap on a crumpled piece of paper. I'm not writing the story. I turned to face her. The defensive anger had drained from her posture, replaced by a stunned silence. I'll tell Brenda I can't do it. That it's a conflict of interest. That I refuse. I don't know what that will cost me, and right now I don't care. I took a cautious step forward. You asked me what my hands do. They type. They take notes. But they also held your face. They traced the lines on your skin. They learned the shape of you. And that is a story I will never give to anyone else. I was standing right in front of her now. She was watching me, her honey-dark eyes searching mine, looking for the lie, the hesitation. She wouldn't find it. You're not a subject to me, Anna. You're the entire narrative. A long, shaky breath escaped her. The last of the walls behind her eyes crumbled, revealing the raw, vulnerable trust beneath. She uncrossed her arms, her hands hanging limply at her sides. You're crazy, she whispered, but there was no bite in it, only wonder. Probably, I agreed, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down my cheek. But I'm yours. She reached for me then, her hands coming up to cradle my face, her thumbs wiping away the tear. Her touch was so gentle it made me ache. You threw it away? She asked, her gaze flicking toward the trash bin and then back to me. It was the easiest decision I've ever made. She pulled me into her, and I buried my face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of sandalwood and home. Her arms wrapped around me, holding me so tightly it felt like she was piecing me back together. I'm sorry, I mumbled against her skin. I'm so sorry I made you doubt this. Sure, she soothed, one hand stroking my hair. It's okay. We're okay. We stood like that for a long time, in the middle of her warm, cluttered apartment, the threat of the outside world momentarily held at bay. The conflict wasn't magically over. I still had to face Brenda tomorrow. There would be consequences. But in that moment, holding her and being held, I knew I had chosen my truth. I had chosen us. And for the first time since I'd walked into her building, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for us to paint it together. Brenda's office felt like a courtroom. The morning light, so warm in Anna's apartment, was harsh and interrogating here, glinting off the glass desk. I stood before her, my hands clasped to hide their trembling. I'm not writing the profile, I said, my voice clear and surprisingly steady. It's a profound conflict of interest. My relationship with the subject makes it impossible for me to be objective, and I will not exploit her trust for a story. Brenda stared at me, her expression unreadable. Exploit? Claire, that's a very strong word for journalism. It's the right word for this situation, I replied. I am recusing myself. You can assign it to someone else, but I will not be involved, and I will not facilitate an introduction. The silence stretched. I was certain I could hear my career crashing down around me. Then, Brenda sighed, a long weary sound. The publisher loved the waterfront piece. It's sharp, thorough. Exactly what we need. She leaned back in her chair. Fine. The artist profile is dead. For you. But don't make a habit of getting personally involved with your sources. It's messy. The relief was so potent it made me dizzy. I hadn't lost everything. I had, in fact, gained something infinitely more valuable. The walk to Brenda's office the next morning felt like a march to the gallows. The confidence I'd felt in Anna's apartment had been leached away by the sterile fluorescent light of the office building, replaced by a cold, nauseating dread. I had played the scene over and over in my mind. Brenda's fury, the recrimination, the very real possibility of being fired for insubordination. Her assistant waved me in. Brenda was at her desk, staring at her monitor, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't look up. Close the door, Claire. The click of the latch was the sound of a cell door locking. I stood before her, my professional blazer feeling like a costume. Well, she said, finally turning her gaze to me. It was sharp, expectant. I had prepared a speech about journalistic ethics and the importance of maintaining a boundary between the personal and professional. But as I looked at her, all those polished phrases evaporated. The only thing that remained was the raw, unvarnished truth. I can't write the profile on Anna, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted, but clear. I won't. Brenda's expression didn't change. Explain. You asked me to exploit my relationship for a story. To take the most meaningful connection I've made in years and turn it into copy. I won't do that. She isn't a subject. She's the person I'm falling in love with. The admission, spoken aloud in this context, was terrifying and liberating. It's a conflict of interest that can't be resolved. So, I'm refusing the assignment. I braced for the explosion. For the lecture on professionalism, for the threat of termination. Brenda slowly removed her glasses and set them on the desk. She leaned back, steepling her fingers, and studied me with an unnerving calm. The waterfront development piece, she said, her tone conversational. It's good. It's very good. The architect came across as a real person, not a quote machine. The technical details were accessible. The council is already citing it. I blinked, thrown completely off balance. Thank you. It has a depth your work has been lacking lately, she continued, her gaze unwavering. A humanity. It felt like it was written by someone who remembers there are people living in the buildings we write about. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. This refusal. It's unprofessional. It's messy. And frankly, it's a pain in my ass. A long, tense silence followed. Then, she gave a short, sharp nod. But a good journalist knows which stories are worth chasing, and which are worth protecting. The artist profile is dead. For you. Don't make a habit of this, Claire. But for now, get back to work. I need a follow-up on the Community Garden Initiative by Friday. The relief was so physical it made my knees feel weak. I hadn't just been spared, I had in some small unexpected way been understood. Thank you, Brenda. Don't thank me, she said, already putting her glasses back on and turning to her screen, a clear dismissal. Just make sure your personal life continues to have such a positive impact on your prose. I practically floated out of her office. The world, which had seemed so hostile and threatening an hour ago, was now brimming with possibility. I had stood my ground, and the ground had held. That evening, I didn't run to Anna's apartment. I walked with a new, steady purpose. I found her not on the rooftop, but in her workshop, a small sawdust-scented room attached to the living area. She was hunched over a piece of wood, a small plane in her hand, shaving off a curl of oak with hypnotic precision. She was so focused she didn't hear me come in. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. This was another part of her language I was learning, the language of grain and grit, of patience and physical creation. It was a world away from the intangible world of words I inhabited, and yet, it felt like a perfect complementary harmony. She finally looked up, and a smile, effortless and whole, broke across her face. "Hey you." "Hey," I said, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward her. I didn't need to tell her what had happened with Brenda. She saw it in my face, in the ease of my posture. She set the plane down and opened her arms, and I walked into them, burying my face in her shoulder, breathing in the clean, honest scent of wood. "It's okay?" she murmured into my hair. "It's more than okay," I said, my voice muffled by her shirt. "It's handled." She held me for a long moment, her hand making slow, comforting circles on my back. Then she pulled back slightly, her hands moving to my shoulders. "Good. Now, come here. I want to show you something." She led me to her workbench. Lying on a soft cloth was the guitar string from the night we met, the one that had snapped. But it was no longer just a broken string. She had coiled it into an elegant spiral bracelet, soldering the ends together with a tiny, perfect bead of silver. "I couldn't just throw it away," she said, her voice soft. "It was the beginning of everything." She picked it up and fastened it around my wrist. The cool metal rested against my skin, a simple, beautiful artifact of the moment my life had split into before and after. My eyes filled with tears. I looked from the bracelet on my wrist to her face, to the woman who painted sounds and listened to wood and had, with unshakable patience, helped me uncover the song hidden inside my own carefully constructed grain. "I love you," I said. The words were quiet, but they filled the small workshop, settling into the very sawdust on the floor. I hadn't planned to say them, but they were the truest, most necessary words I had ever spoken. Her smile was a sunrise, slow and brilliant, warming everything it touched. She brought her hand to my cheek, her thumb stroking my skin. "I know," she whispered. "I love you too." That night, the rooftop felt different. The city sprawled below us, a universe of lights and stories, but the bubble was gone. We didn't need one anymore. We were no longer an escape from the world. We were a part of it, stronger together. She played her guitar, the new strings ringing out clear and strong in the night air. I sat beside her, my head on her shoulder, the coiled metal of the bracelet a constant gentle pressure on my wrist. My notebook was downstairs, my recorder was empty. There were no observers, no interviews, no articles to be written. There was only this: the music, the city, the warmth of her beside me, and the vast, open, and beautifully uncertain story of us, waiting to be lived, word by perfect word.